about it in the TOC meeting 2 weeks ago, but the actual vote didn't close until the day after that TOC meeting. So, but congratulations to John and Brian.
Thank you.
For volunteering to do
Congratulations,
more work.
folks.
Congrats and thank you.
Yeah, congratulations and welcome.
Everyone.
Now we got to see John's face.
Congratulations.
No. I would prefer him not on camera, so I don't feel old over here. All right, so Louis, should we have the new folks do the presenting work just so that they get the hang of it? I know they have the hang of it already.
Sure.
I
You
was gonna
just
say,
want to see my bank info too.
we should have him do next time.
Yes, that's true. Actually, I'm already presenting the document. What the hell?
This is you. All right.
Okay, we'll get going. Okay, the release for 1.11, the feature freeze is tomorrow. We pushed it back a couple of days. Is everybody still comfortable with that, or is there something burning that we're trying to get in that we might need another day or two?
So just to clarify, today's the 12th.
Yeah, it's today, Louis. Actually, it's supposed to be Friday.
Shows how good my calendar skills are. Okay. Well, still didn't answer my second question. Is there anything burning that we're trying to get in today? John, you have a hand.
Yeah, we do. So we have the Telemetry API implementation. It's roughly halfway done right now. Some of it's already merged, some of it's not yet merged. It may be good to get, I don't think we need to delay the freeze, but it may be good to get an exception to kind of backport that in once it's merged. It should be new functionality really, so it shouldn't be too risky, hopefully. Or if it is, we will make sure to de-risk it. And the other thing is the WASM API. But since that API isn't merged, that may be a bit more of a stretch since we have to merge the API and then do the full implementation and merge that.
My understanding was the WASM API is pretty close, right, Ms. Bender here?
Yeah, it is pretty close to merging, but it still hasn't merged yet. And
it would probably
there's also an implementation PR which is kind of based on the API.
Okay. Seeing as both are additive, I think it sounds like both are in the same boat. I'm comfortable making exceptions to get them in.
So we have testing starting from tomorrow. Do you think there will be any impact? Like, do we need to retest any of those as a regression, or it's okay?
This is all net new functionality. So I think apart from what is tested in kind of general automated tests, right now, I don't think there is anything additional that we need to retest.
So since this is new and this is gonna be a recommended API for people going forward to customize telemetry, I think we don't want a broken experience, even if it's alpha, right? So my question here is, if you're rushing the implementation, like what's the trade-off here? Since it's additive and the API PR I think is merged, I don't remember. Is it okay to have the implementation come out in a patch release, or is this too much? I just feel like the first version of this should be good rather than we rush it and get something broken and then we actually fix it in a patch release, which we often do, right?
Well, so we have some implementation already checked in, Niraj.
Okay, we do?
Right, so it's more about more of the implementation So within the definition of the law, it meets the feature freeze requirement. Now, if the feature is unstable by the time we're done with testing, then clearly the feature would have to be marked as experimental, right?
It's kind of dicey with a new API because API versioning is alpha. There's nothing below alpha, but I guess we can still do it.
Well, we could have the API be alpha and the feature experimental.
Sure. Okay.
My other comment I'll add here is the code freeze isn't until August 3rd. So
Yeah.
there's still some time to go through and test it and everything.
Right.
Okay.
So experimental would change our approach to docs. Yes, that means we don't document it for end users.
Yes.
Or we do, but with a big warning at the top.
Yeah, I think either is valid. And the WASM API is kind of almost sort of in the same boat, although maybe a little bit less far along, because there's a PR, but there's no implementation check today. Which again would be experimental. If we were to make an exception for it going in. Which, given that it's intended to replace Envoy filter as an API, it's hard to imagine that that could be any less stable than what it's replacing.
It's a different kind of stability. Envoy filter works the first time. It doesn't work the second time when you upgrade. So
if you can figure out what it actually does.
True.
So Mandar, if it doesn't go in today, do you want an exception for it?
Yeah, I think it would. Yes, I would really like to have an exception for it because it's yeah, we have essentially another 3 months is yeah. I think.
Okay.
So should we give some timeline for the exception? Because obviously we don't want like last week before the release and drop this blob of code that could instabilize the core.
I think that's fair. So what would be a reasonable?
I think it comes back to what Shraddha was asking, right? Like, if a big PR comes in like this, does it re-trigger any of those evaluations that we have done through community testing?
Right, which is Shwada's concern too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if it does, because it has made whatever changes to the code, then it's kind of step back, right?
Yeah.
So that's
okay.
Go
So
ahead.
how about this? I will work with John kind of later today, and then we'll come back with kind of a better assessment of what that is. And I think tentatively, if that checks out, then we are saying that it's okay to have an exception. If it doesn't check out, then we should do something asynchronously with TOC on the stock.
okay. I would still say, if we are trying to debate whether the feature should be experimental or alpha, whether it's the WASM API or the metrics API, you just bring it up in the TOC so that we can have a good discussion about it.
So is this about the label or like?
I want to make sure the first version of this that goes out is actually usable, right? So if we are not sure our testing coverage is how good our testing coverage is, or if we are unsure of our docs, it's better to just be clear on it and make a call, take a call.
Okay, and then I think the second thing that I think, Neeraj, you raised about the API goes in and it's declared kind of usable in the patch release. It seems weird, but it solved this problem. So I would like to get other people's thoughts on this as well. Like, what's the? It definitely circumvents some rules, but does it also circumvent the spirit of the rules? That's the question. I think John has his hand up.
That was for something else.
Carson has his up too.
Yeah. Is there any reason to ship this particular data? Any other important feature in 1.11 that we must ship, or is it just we got 3 years ago, we started to release every X months and we keep doing it without reanalyzing why we are doing it? I mean, what if we just delay 1 month release and get everything in a good shape, and will the user benefit from having another upgrade that doesn't add much? Or it's an important API.
I think that's a valid question. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Neeraj.
I think that's a valid question, Costin. I was going to raise this up myself. In general, I believe having some predictability in the release cadence is good for the community in the phase we are, right? Just so that people don't have to understand, okay, is this release pushed? Like, if you make a conscious choice, the release is late because of staffing or some critical bugs, that's a different decision. If you fall into the pattern of X number of features need to go in, and as long as they don't go in, the release is getting pushed, that is little hard to explain to anyone, because most of our features tend to be like that. We say it's going to come out in 1.8, but it might come out in 1.11. So there's no planning.
Neeraj, you're right. It makes it difficult for our users to plan their upgrade and their validation processes as well.
Yeah.
Or for the vendors to do the same, frankly.
Is 3 months still the right period? I mean, again.
Well, that's a separate topic.
Yeah.
As we all know, Kubernetes moved to 4 months, and it might be perfectly reasonable to move to 4 months, which would give us 1 more month of development time and 1 less release qualification effort a year.
Louis, the Envoy is still on the quarterly ones.
Not clear that matters.
It does for Envoy's support policy. If we were to move to a 4-month release cadence, we would not be able to stay within a supported Envoy release in each of our shipments. And we explored that, Brian and Avery and I did, in the document for extended support releases. I think it's in the test and release working group folder if you wanted to follow up on it.
I think this release cadence rabbit hole is something that we shouldn't get into just yet. We should answer these questions for Mandar and his team so that they can move forward. Costin, I'm not trying to dismiss what you raised. We can come back once this is done.
So Shweta, when is the community testing day nominally?
It's starting tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Okay. Okay, so we're asking. So the argument against late check-ins is that the community testing finds systemic issues. Do we find that to be the case, or do we tend to find that the community testing finds localized issues in the features that people are testing?
Also, does the new features have their own tests yet? Most of the time experimental, I don't know. What's the...
Yeah, I would say in the past, like long ago, the docs tests were basically our tests, and that's how we found bugs. Like we found very fundamental bugs in Istio because our test coverage was pretty bad. Mm-hmm. These days, it's pretty rare. Like we find, very localized bugs. Sometimes they're fairly impactful, but they're still like, this happens on egress gateway with the retries or something like that, like very localized, just because their test coverage is better. To answer Shweta's question, these new features would be, experimental. So we either have no docs officially, or they would be probably untested initially. So we'll have, coverage of the feature itself, but we won't have docs tests because we may not even have docs. So it's kind of outside the purview of the docs testing, if that makes sense.
Although we could have docs tests in main, right, without having them in the release branch. Correct?
I'm a little confused as what's the benefit of having the API marked as alpha, which will show up in the reference documentation. No documentation on how to use it shows up because it's experimental.
We can hide the API reference from docs, Neeraj.
Okay, so basically we're going to hide the entire feature. All right.
Well, we can make the decision, right?
Right.
So that's the other thing. If we're happy with the test coverage, if it's met all the requirements for alpha, right? So the concern was community testing finding a bug caused by these two exceptions. Given that both of these things happen in the processing flow of the control plane, they're pretty well covered by the automation at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. My concern would be finding bugs in the documentation of this feature,
right?
Because normally the devs who write those documentation, they tend to be biased. You need someone else to look at this documentation and test it.
Right, so there would have to be documentation review, and we would, the working groups would be expected to review the docs tests. If
So
there were
the API doc in both these cases is actually like fairly comprehensive. Maybe we could add a little bit to WASM. So the API doc itself is enough for people to get started, especially those that are interested. So I think that we can definitely like having a proper doc, separate doc just from the API doc, I don't think is a requirement to get some mileage out of this.
But I think we can somewhat short circuit this conversation. Lynn had a timeline expectation, right? We have another TOC meeting next week.
Okay.
I would suggest that we check in on the state of this, and that if it looks like it's going to go beyond next week, then maybe we don't allow it, right? So what do other TOC members think about a week to get the feature and the implementations checked in with their tests?
That sounds fine to me, but I want to make sure what are we actually blocked on? On the telemetry API, I think it's mostly reviewing of the PR. On the WASM, I think it's review of the API. So that would be the TOC blocking for now, and then review of the implementation once that's through. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay, I just want to make sure if we have such a tight deadline, the people that are blocking it are aware that they should invest some time in this week.
So
yeah, I think that's reasonable. I remember, I think it was a week or two, Manda, you hold a meeting and you invite us to give you the final feedback on the telemetry API. So if you need such a thing for WASM, feel free, just let us know, because we don't want to block you also. Because I do find out having a meeting to discuss is actually really helpful than just, comment on a PR and then 2 days later, we forgot to follow up.
Okay, I will go through the PR now, and then if necessary, set up one for tomorrow.
Yep. Louis, go ahead, sorry.
No, I didn't have anything else. I was just going to say, I think Neeraj, Lynn, John, and I have been the ones reviewing that. So I'm happy to attend a meeting.
Yeah, same here. I have not paid much attention to the WASM API just because it was already very noisy, and I wanted to get things cleared up. But happy to attend meetings, any of the meetings tomorrow or day after.
Yeah, I agree. Same here.
And one thing I would suggest, by the way, Mandar, is before the meeting, if you call one, try to organize all the open questions into a list and get that like as an agenda, just to speed things up.
Yeah, will do.
Yeah, they did that last time with the Telemetry API. So I think Doug did a good job.
Yeah, that was a great example of that. Yeah.
All right, will do. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, coming back. Shweta, is there anything else you wanted to say about the release and
No.
logistics?
That's about it. We do have a release manager now from Red Hat as well as Google. So I was talking to John and Brian. So I think the Red Hat, I forgot the name. I think his name is John too. He's starting with the feature freeze today, and one from Google. Maybe we can start taking his help from 112.
Sorry, what were the names? I'm going to capture them.
John.
Yeah, John Wendell.
Okay. Did I spell that right? And Google. I still have to confirm today, but.
Well, we don't need from Google now, right, Louis? I mean, we can use Google one from 112 because we already have 3 now. And John is the experienced one, so we fulfill the criteria.
Okay. I will let them know. In fact. Okay, no offline docs. We already covered congratulating the new victims on the TOC. Talked about the feature freeze. Is there anything else related to the feature freeze other than those two big items?
No, not yet. Thank you.
Working group leads, anything? Okay. Mandar, you wanted to talk about compatibility flags.
Did I? Oh, okay.
You did.
Okay, I must have added that sometime. Let me just recreate the context. Oh, yeah. So it's right. So the request was that when we break compatibility in any way, and here we have like a couple of examples of when we did break compatibility. We provide some way for users to still choose to use the compatible behavior. And the request was that, can we lengthen it? So right now, it's like a 3 release thing, but can we lengthen it to 4 or 5 to give those people more time? The fact that the request came means that the 3 release thing wasn't enough, right? And both these were, I mean, are actually like good specific examples of, especially the use legacy selectors. So the request was that can we keep the compatible behavior longer than just 2 or 3 releases, or 3, which is what it's today.
Just remind me again what use legacy selectors did.
So use legacy selectors change the behavior of when sidecars are injected. So in in the new behavior, even if you don't have the namespace marked for sidecar injection, but you have a workload marked for sidecar injection, then it will work in the new behavior. Whereas in the old one, you had to have the namespace selected to begin with, and then you could do things inside the namespace.
Okay.
Mandar, in the new one, it has to be a label, not an annotation, right?
Right.
In the old behavior, okay.
Right.
So there are two changes, basically. Like you also need to explicitly use labels. Yeah.
Right. And I think the other part was just that some things which people didn't expect would be injected are suddenly injected, and that can break things. Costin, your hand.
I mean, changing it to opt out seems perfectly reasonable, and it's already happened. Removing it, I completely agree. We should not remove any more options or anything really for a very, very long time. I mean, even more than that, 4 weeks, whatever. I mean, we are past the point where we can just remove stuff and assume that everyone will upgrade and do stuff. I mean, we add features. We need to accept that we'll have to pay the price and be more careful when reviewing or adding features, but extend the period because it will hurt a lot of people accidentally. Look at the distribution of people still using 1.5, 1.4 and olders.
John has his hand up.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, I mean, I know this webhook one is just an example, but I think it's a good example, is that I truly doubt that anyone will be impacted by that change. Like, that's why we went through a somewhat aggressive, I mean, it was over 3 releases, but it's more aggressive than, say, the original destination change process, is because it's like the only way it could be impacted is if you happen to put a label that does nothing on a pod, and then like you happen to also put in a namespace that has a weird labeling setup. It's like this incredibly bespoke configuration that it could impact you. So while I do agree that for impactful changes, like the inbound cluster one, we should definitely keep it around longer. It seems tough to say that for any change, like we should keep the flags around for a whole year when, they're effectively like not going to cause any issues with real customers.
The one thing I'll say here is this did come from a customer, right?
Yes, it did.
So this customer is going to be a 4 release on release, which is 4 or 5 releases behind. Then I'm guessing they want to jump ahead all the way to the newer release, right?
I mean, we shouldn't focus on just one customer,
Right.
but in this particular case, it's actually not that they want to stay on older versions, but that they want to upgrade new versions, but turn off certain changes in that version so that they can more quickly upgrade without having to handle every breaking change at once. So like they'll upgrade and turn off all the new feature flags so that they get the older behavior, but they're still on the newer version, and then they'll over time switch things over, which I think is a reasonable strategy when there's breaking changes.
Got it. But I agree with John here. For this change, that's why I was mentioning the label selector. You need a fairly bespoke configuration to accidentally get newer behavior.
That happens, and it's very hard to predict, and people will be nervous about upgrading. They'll stick with the old version longer than necessary because they're scared that the new upgrade will break them, and so on. And we keep the cycle of, until we have a clear beta APIs that it's and we are clear that only beta APIs are supported. In reality, all alpha APIs are used by people.
So what is the cost of maintaining the flag?
I think it's case by case is part of the issue. I mean, this legacy selector one is actually a moderate amount of tech debt to keep around. For some of the other ones, it's just, an if statement in the code, and it's not that big of a deal. But once you add, 10, 20 of these flags, then over time, they kind of start to accumulate. Some in the past, we've had ones that are extremely high cost, but we don't currently have any of those active now. But I could see, for example, once we add something like BTS or I don't know, that's the only example I can think of in the future. We'll probably have some of these, really heavy flags that may be pretty costly to keep over time.
I think BTS is a good example, which I expect that we will keep the old behavior for a pretty long time.
Yep. Yeah, like I can't think of any good examples of when the behavioral change to the user is small, but the cost to us is high. Usually they're fairly proportional.
But the cost for us, I mean, we are, a small group and we have a lot of users. So if you multiply by number of users and the damage that it can produce, the cost and benefits are for even for supporting long term this kind of features, it's changing.
Right. So, well, I mean, it's not a feature here, right? One of the issues is we're trying to change the default behavior.
I don't think that's controversial. I mean, it's perfectly fine to change the default behavior, but the question is to not remove the option to have the old behavior in place.
Right, but even that represents an upgrade breakage risk for users, correct?
But at least they have a solution.
Right. Yeah, so they will go through the upgrade notes and then they'll see, okay, I can do this now. Versus the code is removed and now either you like get all your ducks in a row before the upgrade or you just delay the upgrade.
And we did not write any tooling to make an assessment about whether users would be affected by the change.
I think it should be fairly simple to write a pre-check tool for this as well, right? I don't think there is one.
Louis, are you talking about the use legacy selector one or the other one?
Use legacy.
Use legacy selector in this case.
Okay. So again, I think I agree with John. I still can't think of like how would it impact a user on upgrade. Like I remember reviewing these PRs, and I think when Lynn was on it, we extensively grilled John on that, saying, will it impact users? And he convinced us it won't.
Wait, there is a user who is impacted, right?
That's
I
not
don't
necessarily
think-
true, Louis. There is a user
Yeah.
that says that they have a lot of clusters and that their users may put random labels on random pods that don't do anything, and that they can't actually know what's
Exactly,
going on in
right.
their clusters because they're so large and they don't know what the users are putting on their labels. And so it could hypothetically impact them.
Okay, so would having a tool that told this particular customer that they were not at risk deliver sufficient reassurance to them?
For this customer, Amanda, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think they said it wouldn't help because they actually have so many clusters they can't even run the tool.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, like we shouldn't hyper focus on one customer, but that is the case for this one. So
One more thing I want to add here. We are also discussing the tags and introducing a new mechanism to selection and other things. So maybe just wait until we have the replacement in place, stable, and move to beta and clearly in use before we delete the whole. And then we can wholesale delete the whole selection if we want to.
Well,
that would be quite some time, Costin, right?
Sure, but we can afford it. It's not. Okay.
So one actually there are a couple of things, right? One is sort of this policy decision forward-looking of what should the guideline be, right? Is 3 releases enough, or should we just say, you know what, the standard is 5 releases, 4 releases, and if we need to make it sooner, then that's an exception, and then we can bring it to the TOC and say, yes, why do we need to remove this code earlier? So that's kind of the first question. And then a more localized question is that since in this particular case, the code has been removed from 1.11 already, do we do something or like it is what it is? So yeah, those are the two specific ones that we should answer.
Right, so there's a thing here I don't get. Right. On the one hand, the customer is saying that they cannot, sorry for the background noise, they cannot run the tool against every cluster. On the other hand, we were going to tell them you have to go and set this flag in every cluster. Right, right. I'm not worried about removing code. I'm worried about asking users to take manual action. Sounds like they still have to in this case, in every cluster. Is that not true?
If they're planning on upgrading every cluster, then they have the opportunity to set whatever flags they would like to at upgrade time, right?
How?
using the upgrade, the Istio cuddle install or Helm commands?
Right, but setting this flag is a manual thing that they do.
I see. It's not accessible through the upgrade APIs.
Oh, it is, right? It's just a values.
It is.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
it is accessible.
Okay.
So as long as this is communicated with all the different cluster owners, saying that when you upgrade, use this flag, and I think maybe Louis, that's your point. At some point, someone needs to touch those clusters, and the question is whether it's easier when you touch those clusters to just run the tool and find out whether you're affected, or use a flag. And I think that the use of flag is easier because it doesn't involve a decision. You can just have instruction that says, hey, when you upgrade, use this flag, and that's it. There's no decision point. Whereas you run the tool, and if you are affected, then you go fix it now, and then you come back after you fix it and you install it again. So I think that, that's what I suspect it would be. That just
this does sound like an argument for improving our upgrade tooling, right? To make these kinds of what are completely automatic decisions on people's behalf.
I would remind her that people running manual Istio cattle to install whatever is not something that works everywhere, because there are managed versions where the Istio is automatically upgraded, and users may install Istio and never touch it again because they expect someone else to manage it for them. And this kind of stuff, I mean, in this particular case, is not a problem because it's values and it's specific to Istio cattle install and operator-based installs, not. But for any features in mesh config and anywhere where is not installer only, I think it's super dangerous because a lot of people do not actually install themselves or there are many teams and it's very complicated.
That would still be something that the control plane operator could run, wouldn't it, Costin?
How? I mean, it's not, in some cases, you don't even have access to the cluster itself. You cannot actually run tools inside the cluster and then what are you going to do? Are you going to freeze it on an old version that is out of support? You'll end up with 1.5 again, or 1.4, and situation where you cannot upgrade it because you remove some API and there is no way to without user intervention.
Okay, I'd like to better understand that case, but I don't want to hold up the meeting, so maybe I'll sync with you after.
Yep.
I have one question for John. So is the negative case here also impacted? So in the old method, if I didn't have a namespace annotation, then all the pods in that namespace will never get injected, right? So now, how do I achieve that? Is that possible? Because any pod which, go ahead.
Yeah, you just put injection equals disabled. So it's kind of like disabled means disabled. Nothing means defer to the pod. So.
That possibly does mean also, okay. That might involve some actions from the user. So that's another impact, right? Previously, they didn't need to have any qualifiers on a namespace. Now they explicitly need to add this disable to make sure nothing accidentally gets injected ever. That makes it interesting whether we should ever remove this flag then. I know it's taken, the code is gone.
So Mandar, the request to extend the option to 4 releases, really this is another representation of, I have the budget to perform 1 meaningful upgrade a year.
Somewhat. Yes, I think they are willing to upgrade more than once a year, but they want to have more control or more time in dealing with these kinds of changes. So they're fine upgrading sort of automatic, like just better behavior or a new API that they want to use. That's all fine, but they want to have more control and more time on how long it takes them to deal with incompatibilities.
I mean, so in this case, we gave them what? The full support window of 110 to do this?
Correct. We gave them full support window of 110. Right. Yeah.
Can I mention an alternative solution to this problem, which we briefly discussed, which is to give power to the users, basically. I mean, like we do with gateways and other things, where we let them control the webhooks however they see fit. We already kind of have a stable protocol. It's pretty clear how it works. And there are some samples charts we can provide, and then they can control label injection to their, whatever they feel necessary for their cluster. We stay out of the business of configuring the mutating webhook ourselves, which is wonderful for many other reasons. I mean, because it's removes, I mean, gives them a lot more opportunities with little cost for us.
I would be surprised if users feel like that's a reduction in their cost custom.
It is not only because then they can use whatever label systems they have. I mean, they have full control over the labeling system, and they no longer depend on install options. And also, we don't have to manipulate mutating webhooks and anything like that.
But isn't that the same as Istio cut inject, and they don't do that anyway? And it wouldn't work with CNI.
No, it will work. I mean, it's just specifying the label selectors, and you can already do it. I mean, it's not nothing that prevents you from creating a...
I know you can do it, right? But we would have to describe, and users would have to implement, right? And I think we're getting a very strong signal that users don't want to implement things.
Right. I think
want to use things.
It would be, for most users, it would represent additional unwanted burden, right? Like the way it is today actually works for kind of most users. So if we say that now it's your responsibility, and they haven't actually considered it a problem to begin with, I think having an option for advanced users, maybe.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Advanced users is fine, but it doesn't solve the upgrade problem for like.
No.
Majority.
It does solve the upgrade problem for those users who have these kind of concerns, because hey, you have this Helm chart that you apply. You can customize if you need it, and it preserves the whole behavior. We don't have to put it part of the main code. We just provide it. Hey, for backward compatibility users, just apply this chart, and you have the behavior that we had in the past. Or apply this other, and you can customize to have label foobar do the same thing.
Seems like that could be a proposal in environment working group, but probably not.
Okay. I mean, not necessarily proposal, which is just some wiki with a Helm chart that has all the mutating webhook and explanation how to get it.
Right.
It's just a URL. I mean, the only field that really matters is a URL, and then to understand the syntax of mutating webhook.
Okay, so are we closer to a decision, or?
I think there are 3 or 4 things getting all mixed in here, right? So one question that you ask is, can we change? So first of all, I'm hoping the current policy is being followed, right? Which is what you laid out. It needs 3 releases to eventually take the code out. You shouldn't make exceptions to that without an approval from TOC, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, in my opinion, whether we should extend this to 4 releases or 5 releases or 6 releases. I don't have enough signals to say 4 is the right magic number here. But I do think on a case-by-case basis, we should be able to extend for few backward compatibility options to more releases, or say, you know what, the cost is fairly low, magically fairly low, and we are going to not remove it at all. But I don't think generically, at least in my mind, we should just say it's 4 or 5 until we have more information. And the third is the specific issue that you brought up. This one is interesting. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I don't have a good answer yet, so I wouldn't let others talk about it.
Okay, so we can. I mean, it's okay. We can think about this offline asynchronously on the doc, but now everyone knows what the issue is. There is, I mean, like 1 or 2 weeks is fine. There is no. Actually, sorry. If we decide that we need to bring back use legacy selectors,
yeah, it has to be soon.
So okay, so then there is urgency for that if we have to decide to bring it back. But otherwise, on the policy side, there is no urgency. We can take time.
Yeah, I'm just worried about the running state, and John, you can correct me. So basically, I have no namespace annotation, and currently I did my check. None of my pods in the namespace I don't want sidecar injected have the injection labels, but then in future somebody adds it. Now that pod will get the sidecar injected because I had not explicitly disabled it on the namespace.
Yeah, but no one should be impacted by this on upgrade, because it's if you have a new label that was introduced in 1.10 and you don't have the label explicitly on the namespace, then you'll be injected when you won it previously.
Yes.
But in theory, there should be 0 people with that label because it did absolutely nothing prior to 1.10. So there's no reason, right?
On upgrade event, I agree. But after an upgrade at runtime, when things can change by your tenants, right? If I'm a platform operator, my tenant, that's also a little impactful. Like, I'll be worried if that happens.
But I don't think there's any, like, that is the correct behavior. If your pod says I want to be injected and the namespace doesn't deny it, then it should be injected, right? And if you say that the namespace admin is trying to have like a RBAC level control that nothing's injected, that's not a real boundary, because you can still inject manually anyways, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, what about the scenario where the pod annotation says, I don't want to be injected, while the namespace enables injection?
Yeah, so the logic is that if either level disables it, it's disabled. So if the pod says don't inject me, it should never be injected, regardless of the namespace.
Okay, so even if not enable the legacy selector, they would still, like, the pod annotation says not injection would continue to be honored?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any breakage issues, honestly, but I do recall I've spent a lot of time learning the differences and the impact for the user about a month ago. Now I can't remember most of it. So it's complicated. That's the key takeaway for me. It's like many scenarios people have to think through, and then probably perform a lot of testing to make sure, their existing behavior are not impacted. I think that's the most impactful thing for our users, just to understand and perform extensive testing with different combination they have.
And Linz, thank you. I completely agree with you. I mean, the statement that it's complicated, it's absolutely correct in this kind of situations. That's why I think, giving users a chart and explaining them how they can set a simple label that they control, and they don't have to understand very complicated Helm chart, templates, may be better for some users, because I don't think anyone, except John, probably nobody fully understands all the combinations and options and interactions that exist.
Okay, so then then the option is it's already removed, so we keep it that way, but we add a doc in 1.11 that says, here is the Helm chart change. Is that like, because I think the change itself is small, or was there a big code change?
It was just a change to the mutating webhook, but I don't know if we want to put it in 1.11. Like it should be 1.10 is when the behavior changed, right? And it is already in the upgrade notes for 1.10.
We should add that the option will be removed, and we can give people few ways to figure out if they will be impacted, even if it's manual. Or I think that's reasonable.
Well, no one should be impacted unless they use the option, right? And so there's already a warning if you use a removed option. I mean, we can improve it so that for 1.9 upgrade users that they have a script they can run. I'm perfectly fine with that. I think it's actually pretty simple to write as well. But I'm not sure that it makes sense when you're upgrading from 1.10 to 1.11 to run that script.
We're already marking it as a warning, and we removed it. Should we convert that to an error?
What does it even mean if you use Helm?
Sorry, what'd you say?
If you use Helm, if they don't install Istio Cattle but install Helm, what does it mean to have warnings? I mean, there are no warnings as far as I know in Helm.
Yeah, that's true.
And you support Helm.
That's true.
So I think the real options are either we extend it till 1.11, at which point, what changes in 1.12? Like, when are we going to remove this? Or is this something that we have to support both legacy and the modern way of doing things?
I would very much prefer not to add it back. I think we should use this as an example of what we can do going forward and maybe we can add a tool to detect it, and we can give users guidance in the very, very rare case that they're impacted. I mean, this is just a YAML change, so if they really care enough, they can just go apply the old YAML. I don't think we need to maintain it. I think we should use this just as an example of moving forward, how we should handle removing things, and if we should have a policy for that. Well, actually, we kind of do have a policy with the alpha, beta, stable feature definitions, but maybe we should revisit that policy.
Mandar, will you be okay if we create a tool for detecting it? If this change will impact a user, and then
I think that, yeah, so the tool will be useful, but just some guidance on how they can change the YAML files to get the old behavior would actually be just as or kind of more useful here, because then that moves us to I think what Costin was saying earlier, which is that, okay, if you need something different or more, okay, here you can use this other part. So yes to both.
okay. Oh, I think Louis dropped off the call, so we're not sharing the screen. Can someone capture this station? I don't have the document open. Do you mind doing that?
Do it. Isn't that why we added more people to TSC to take notes for us now?
All right, someone do it. Sorry, I've moved on to my tab. So, or I will do it after the call. Okay. So basically, we are going to have tooling, and we are going to have more clarification in the documentation saying, this is how you get the old behavior, even if we have removed the magical option that we had added. Okay. All right. Anything else on this topic?
And then we revisit the 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, later.
Yeah. That's what I would say. I mean, I at least don't have enough information to make a call on that. All right. Thank you, folks.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.